My Gavanen Melonin, and well met indeed. I'm Arachir Galadirthan, head of the modding team behind Divide and Conquer, and welcome to Faction Overviews. We return to give faction overviews from now until the end of time, but now for version 4. So I stress that this video is recorded on the 15th of February 2020, and at this time, version 4 is not released yet. So some of these version 4 videos will be before release, naturally. Not much is going to change, if anything at all, with the factions I'm doing before release. That's the point. We are so close to release, if I may just divert a bit of time talking to that. We are so close to release. I would hope, ideally, to have it out within the next couple of months, but we have no, of course, deadline whatsoever. But that is our kind of aim. So I can happily start these version 4 overviews knowing that if anything does change with these factions, it will be so minor that it wouldn't have even been in the overview anyway. For example, traits or ancillaries, things like that. Because minor ones I won't obviously discuss. We'll only talk about big things here. So the first half of this video will be devoted to the campaign map for Dol Amroth, and then the second half will be their entire unit roster, and we'll talk about them separately, of course, as and when. I think that is everything I wanted to get out of the way. There wasn't anything else, any other caveats or addendums. The way that I'm going to go through it is we'll start off talking about their starting size and their initial army, and then we will move through to their sort of geographical area and what is around them in terms of rebels and whatnot. That then leads on to their neighbours and their diplomacy. Then, more specifically dealing with that faction's economy, and then any gameplay events, be they scripts or be they something through the coding with traits or ancillaries or something along those lines. And finally, this time I will endeavour to give every faction a rating out of 5 in terms of difficulty, which follows the game's own difficulty standards, with 1 being very easy, 2 being easy, 3 about medium average, 4 is hard, and 5 is very hard. It's difficult to contemplate that, of course. The difficulty will be based entirely relatively to the other factions of the game, because I personally think that there isn't a single faction in the game that is actually very hard. The game, on the whole, is on the easier side. But in terms of relative to other factions, certain factions are simply harder. And that is what the rating is for. So you don't need to post in the comments saying... I don't think this faction is difficult at all. This is a joke. Because no, most of the factions aren't difficult in any way. But relative to others, some are. That is the point. But with all of that aside, let us deal then with Dol Amroth, my personal favourite faction and favourite nation in the histories of Middle-earth. Their starting size is, as you can see, rather small. The southern bound is the Isle of Tolfalas and the town of Gobel Tolfalas, which just means Tolfalas village. Moving through, you then get Methrast, which is the southern tip of Belfalas. Sorry, I knew it was called Belfalas. I don't know, my mind just went. Lynn here guarding the straits over there, which is the entry point for most of Harad's forces when they finally come. Dol Amroth out on the west there, and that is it. So you've only got 4 starting regions initially. Your starting army, additionally, is quite small, so the actual garrison of most of the towns consists of a general and a single unit in almost all cases, except for Dol Amroth where you get 2. There is a general and a gentleman over here in this fort, and he has a couple of cavalry units, and he comes with the standard bodyguard. You also get a general up here in this fort as well. So in terms of your actual starting army, it's really small, garrisons only. And you, as I say, you've only got 4 towns. Dealing with unique generals, then almost quite a few of them actually are. So first of all, Prince Adrian, your faction leader, he comes with Talon Knights, the dismounted unit, which many people dislike, but there we are, cavalry's too powerful. So he is a solid and strong infantry general. Lord Imrahil, your faction heir, he comes with the normal bodyguard, as does the gentleman in the fort over here, Istion. However, to the north, you've got a Nimrodel Mariners general, Mistvan, and so he's a good archer unit. In Lynn here, he's a standard bodyguard again, but then down here on the Isle of Tolfalas, where we find Mads Mikkelsen, you get Seaward Spearmen, which is not as good as Talon Knights, obviously, but a very defensive unit. So a good little bodyguard for them there. Moving on then to the general area of Dol Amroth itself. So it is quite a defensible location that the starting regions are made up of. We'll go with are. So To the north here, your realm is bounded by a little river crossing there, which leads you into Itheland. And of course, if you take Itheland, you've got this river here guarding your western bound as well. It's very easy to choke point on the west. There's also, you'll note, a river there marking the bounds between Gondor and yourself. So if things were to turn ill for Gondor in the west, there's checkpoints all the way on your northern border. On the southern border, likewise, you've got the actual Ithir Anduin itself, the mouths of the Anduin, where you can keep the enemy at bay, because there's only certain points you can cross over these straits. And there is then also only a single crossing into Linhir, which is guarded by Linhir, or Eastern Belfalas. The diplomat here showing you the paths. On the eastern side as well, as I say, now Gondor does actually own northern Belfalas, but there's only that simple and single way in there, the next crossing all the way up there. So quite readily defensible. You've got the mountain range stretching right down the middle of Dor en Ernil, the lands of the prince, but recently, as in only last week in fact, this path through the mountain was created. Some of the region boundaries were also slightly edited to ensure that the road from Dol Amroth stretched straight out to Linhir. So it's a bit quicker now getting from Dol Amroth to Linhir, which makes it slightly easier to defend than it did in the past. You will also note that Dol Amroth is one of the few locations in the world that actually has cliffs, which run the entire length of Belfalas. So in terms of sea landings, they're only going to be able to get off primarily from this stretch up here, which gives you this river here if they do land on the northern side. But they can just land at that little village or fishery just there, unfortunately. But also they can land at your docks. So the docks are the key landing points. There's one at Dol Amroth, just south of Itheland, and just to the west of Methrast. But then, as I say, to the east of Methrast they can also land. But they can't get very close to Dol Amroth without literally dropping on top of you in your own port. So that's quite handy. In terms of rebels, as you can quite clearly see, the only real rebels you're ever going to contend with are the garrison at Itheland, which you will almost certainly take in the first few turns, because you'll beat Gondor to it, no doubt. To the south, here in Baradhan and Tirithoros, you will note that, because this of course is at turn 2, so all of the turn 1 auto expansions have taken place, you will note that these are rebel provinces as well. So you do get a bit of a chance to beat the Aradanaim and Harad to the northern bounds of Horondor, so you can push out early if you so choose. Do note that the AI does use naval boarding, and Harad will frequently attack Gobel Tolfalas if they can get a proper port established. They do start with 2 regions that actually have the ability to get ports, or in fact I think they have 4 regions that have the ability to get ports, but you will note that at the current time, none of them are actually ports, so you do get a bit of time before Harad can sail to you. The Ardanaim, of course, already get ports and indeed already get boats, which are also better than your boats, as we'll touch on later on, but they don't seem as keen. It seems to be Harad who absolutely love raiding, but don't get me wrong, the Ardanaim will land on your shores, and they really, really like Gobel Tolfalas. They will try and get it as often as they can. So you've got to be wary of the sea. The last point in dealing with the sort of area and features of Dol Amroth in terms of land-based, we come on to custom settlements, and you do get a custom settlement, which we've discussed already, which is Gobel Tolfalas, and it does look very much like that on the battle map. So there is a small ruined town that is on land, and then you get a nice bridge defense where you can hold back the enemy, and they have to make it out to the small island where your town square is found. So Gobel Tolfalas is a very easily defensible town and can be held with, if you get some archers in it and a couple of strong defensive units such as your general Baragund, who already starts there, you can hold the enemy back for a long time provided they don't starve you out, which the AI doesn't tend to do, to be honest. They do like to attack and assault early doors, which is useful. It means you get to actually fight on these battle maps. But that's the only custom battle map you start with. Dol Amroth, hopefully in future, may well be a custom battle map, but for the moment it is simply not. It is just a standard Gondorian fortress, I think it is, the highest tier of castle. Stronghold is the name, Stronghold is the name. But no, I'm fairly certain it is a fortress. Yes, it is, sorry. So it's a tier you can't even actually upgrade to on your own. Itheland is an elven town, but it's not custom, it's just a standard elven town. Moving then to neighbours, of course, you are neighbours with Gondor, and not only that, you are allied to Gondor. And you are no longer a vassal of Gondor, where you were in the past, but now you are simply allied to them. You will note you are also allied to the Kingdom of Rohan far to the north, which is of course because you're a fiefdom of Gondor, and your starting enemies are the expected Ardenaim, Harad, and Mordor. Note you are not at war with Khand at the start of the game, and it is up to you whether or not you want to hedge your bets on whether they will side with the Free Peoples or against them. Because if Harad do side with the Blue Wizards, then this is suddenly an extra ally you'll get about 50 or 40 turns in. And if they side with Mordor, then it's just 4 enemies in a line all coming for you. So it can prove to be a bit of a difficult early game. Ideally, I would suggest trying to not go to war with Khand until you know exactly where they're going to stand, because you don't want to go to war with them and then the event kicks in which forces them to be your ally, and then because you're actually like sieging their town, or they might be sieging yours, there's a chance that they will instantly break that alliance and be at war with you again, which totally negates the effects of the script, so gotta watch out for that. Moving on to your economy then. Economy, it should be said as a blanket statement with the first of these new overviews, economy in this game is easy to get. It is easy to make money in Medieval 2. Now some of you will say, but Gallo, I've watched you play this game and your economy is always atrocious. And I would say to you, yes, but I still managed to win even without putting any attention into my economy. People who actually do put attention into their economy, you will find it is insanely easy to make money, and there's very little we can do about that without turning the game into a horrible, horrible grind. So economy, generally speaking, money is easy to come by. But speaking more specifically of Dol Amroth, it is easy again for yourselves to make money. You are a nation that can build every tier of every conceivable thing. So your castle, you get all the way up to Stronghold. There are 3 tiers of castle. The Keep is the starting tier. You can't build that. The game creates that itself. And then there is the Castle is the middle tier, and a Stronghold is the final tier. In terms of towns, the village is the starting level. Then you get a town, a large town, a city, and finally a large city. And you, as Dol Amroth, finally the huge city. I've lied to you all. Town, large city, huge city. You as Dol Amroth get them all. And each tier has higher and better versions of the previous buildings, such as, for example, marketplaces. A great market requires a large city. Not every nation in the game gets large cities, so you instantly have an advantage because you get the highest tiers. So that will help you out a lot. There aren't any specific buildings that do assist you overly in terms of economy, but do note you are a person who gets the Merchant Guild, which does mean that you are a nation that actually gets a merchant. Remember, you'll only get 1 merchant, but that's still, if you can keep him on top of a tile for a long time, he will start making you a good amount of money, and it's just an extra way of earning a little bit of money. But other than the Merchant's Guild, you don't get anything that really stands out as a super money maker. But no, you do also get banks as well, which do just give you a flat gold income. And again, they're from the highest tiers, so you have to wait till you get up to the higher levels. But that's about all that really stands out. In terms of unique buildings, and we'll start with the guilds, I've already mentioned the Merchants Guild. Your standard guild is the Warriors Guild. You can get the Royal Swordsmiths Guild, the Order of the Swan, and finally the Brotherhood of the Talon. Remember, the first tier of guild you can get in every settlement, the second tier you can have 1 in your entire nation, and the third tier there can only be 1 in the entire world. Rest assured, the AI will beat you to that third tier. So you're very unlikely to ever get the Brotherhood of the Talon, which is unfortunate because it actually allows you to train Talon Knights who are otherwise restricted to only your core Heartland regions. So that is a bit of a pain. But the Swordsmith Guild at its core is exactly that. It's just a melee weapon bonus. And then after that you get a morale bonus to your troops. And then, as I say, finally the third tier gives you the Talon Knights. You also, of course, being a major horse nation, get the Horse Breeders Guild. The Horse Breeders Guild has the reason why there's nothing there is because we need to write the text for it, but it has an effect which doesn't actually show in the game. So it doesn't actually show up here what it does, which is disappointing. But what it does, if memory serves, is make all of your cavalry units train faster, I think. I should have read that and looked that up beforehand. It's a buff to your cavalry, but I can't remember if it's a battle buff or a recruitment buff, but I think it's a recruitment buff. But unfortunately, as I say, it's something that the game doesn't list. So we do need to edit the text so that you actually know what it's doing for you, because otherwise you'll think that doesn't do anything, why would I ever want it? You will note from the Master Horsebreeders Guild, where you only get 1 in the world, 1 in your nation, sorry, you can actually train Seaward Lancers out of that, which is just a handy little addition. Moving through then, and that's all of the specific guilds. Note you get a military academy, although its name needs to be rechanged because it's now the Fiefdom Way Station. So the Fiefdom units that you will see in the second half of this video, which are only recruitable in the fiefs themselves, now you can build the Fiefdom Way Station in certain locations, and that will retrain your Fiefdom units. So you no longer have to send them all the way back home to get them retrained. We'll cover the Fiefdom a little more in a moment on gameplay events. Blacksmiths you get all the way to the top with Numenorian armor, as you can see there. And of course you do also get the advanced blacksmith. Oh no, I'm thinking maybe you don't, that's why it's showing up like that. It's probably not supposed to show. I don't think you do get the advanced blacksmith. I again would have to check into that. It wouldn't be a Gallo video with me looking at something and thinking, oh, I'd completely forgotten about that. I probably should have looked into it. And that is going to be indicative of the entire series, I'm afraid. Otherwise, the buildings are fairly standard. You'll note at the bottom here, because this, when you click on the building browser for the type of town or the type of city or castle that you are not, then it shows you every building in existence that your nation could possibly build. So, for example, this is what we can actually get in our castle, but the city shows us everything else, in case you were unaware of that. So you'll note Tharbad Bridge, but of course the Tharbad Bridge is only available in Tharbad, but that is a feature that you do get. So if you make it all the way to the north and are able to rebuild the bridge at Tharbad, then you are able to actually train Tharbad Royal Guard and get the advantages there. Likewise, if you make it even further to Deadman's Dyke itself, you can get the House of Kings, which may or may not be moved to Numenas because that is where it's actually supposed to be. But otherwise, that is about it. I'll have to check on the Advanced Blacksmith because I'm sure you do get it, but I wonder why it doesn't show. But that's in terms of all of your buildings. You will recall that you used to get an actual military academy. That's why it's showing, because it's using sort of the old name. But the Fiefdom Way Station retrains your Fiefdom units. But you do also now get, you saw there in the building browser for Dol Amroth, the Fiefdom Barracks itself. So you don't get a military academy at all anymore. Remember, there are no experience point bonuses in the mod anymore at all. And instead, the Military Academy is now your Fiefdom Barracks, which brings us on to the gameplay events. What sort of things affect Dol Amroth's gameplay? Well, of course, chief amongst them are the Fiefdom units. As a nation in Gondor of some import, you are able to train units from the lesser fiefdoms. And these, as you can see, are Connacht Cavalry, Anfalas Pikemen, Blackroot Vale Archers, Lebanon Clansmen, and Lebanon Marines. And each comes from the region of their name. Just to give you a quick overview, if you are unsure, Anfalas is this region here, where Lond Gallen is. Connacht is Serolond up to there. Blackroot Vale Archers come from, I think, Ethring and Kalembel, because the Blackroot Vale is actually one of these two rivers. I believe it's this one on the right. But we like that unit a lot, so you get it in two locations, Ethring and Kalembel. Lamadon units come from Brethil, and I think possibly Tarnost as well. And then the Lebanon Marines come from the entire stretch of the Anduin, if memory serves. So I think that's Fanwelond, Linhir, Tirithoros, Hauthanur, Pelargia, Karasast, and Ostithil. You also do after the barracks event, because of course remember that's not showing you post-barracks event units. But after the barracks event, you do also get the Axemen of Lasarnak, which come from Lasarnak, which is Karasast. That building, what was it actually called? Fiefdom Barracks. Are you present on this side? Yes, you are. But it still doesn't show us. But you do get Axemen of Lasarnak once you hit the barracks event as well. I think that's all of the Fiefdom units. In terms of actual scripts affecting Dol Amroth, the only thing is something that will affect you, but you won't actually be able to make use of it, if that makes sense, is the Ardenaim raids, of course. So whilst Umbar is held by the Ardenaim, you will get Corsair Invasions, is what they used to be called, and they will land at various places and attack your towns without warning. So unlike a normal landing, where you see the ship coming, you see the troops disembark, you see them walk to your town, there's none of that. The ship will appear, the army will appear on land, and it will siege your town. And the only way to stop these invasions is to take Umbar itself. Once Umbar falls to you or Gondor, or I think just anyone, to be honest, as long as it's not held by the Ardenaim, then the invasions will stop. So that is how you turn them off. You are, of course, affected by the ring script, as all people are, and that hasn't been amended yet, so your options are to take it to Imladris and then destroy it, or simply hold on to it, or give it back to Sauron, although I don't think good nations can give it back. But those are the only scripts, if memory serves, that affect Dol Amroth at the moment. Not a very script-heavy nation at all. So then finally I would come to ranking the difficulty from 1 to 5, with 1 being the easiest and 5 being the hardest. I would state that these are all going to be tricky and are entirely subjective, but I would put Dol Amroth firmly at a 3. And my reasoning is because Dol Amroth, it's very easy to make money. As I've already said, you're a nation with very few restrictions, so it can be quite simple to make money, and you're also backed up by having a really elite core of units. Your army is very, very good. You are much better than Harad, and you are much better than Khand, you're much better than Mordor. You are only actually challenged by the Ardenaim, but they won't get to you until they've gone through the Principality of Mirlond, which is guarded by Captain Mirazor to the north there, and Gobo Mirlond itself, and you'll note both of those have large garrisons. It takes the Ardenaim a long time to get through, so you have a lot of time to breathe. That being said, you are wholly outnumbered, and it can totally turn against you if you lose a few key battles. But the thing that brings it back around, despite being outnumbered, is how overwhelmingly powerful your cavalry is, as we shall see in a moment. You are a nation of elite heavy cavalry. That is how you would be described if we were to give you a sort of one-line tag. Your army is elite and with a focus on heavy cavalry. That is the tagline for your military. And cavalry is so overpowered in this game because that's the way it's always been and it's never going to change, and we like it, provided you can utilize the cavalry well. If you're not a particularly good micro management person on the battlefield, like myself, and you frequently forget to charge your cavalry in and out, then you will struggle because you won't get the benefit of it. But if you can control your cavalry adeptly, you'll find the campaign to be quite simple. Do note as well, your northern border is normally safe for the entire game, so you only really have to focus south. Previously, a tip that we often recommended was to rush Umbar and try and take the Ardenaim out of the game, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend that anymore because I think Harad will likely be a bigger threat to you, because Harad get more troops than the Ardenaim. So the Ardenaim can go toe-to-toe with you, man to man, but the Haradrim will outnumber you significantly. Nowhere near as bad as Mordor, but of course Gondor's got Mordor covered for a while, so you haven't got to worry about them just yet. So I couldn't really give you tips, to be honest, other than use your cavalry. So there we are, Dol Amroth gaining a 3, and now we shall move over to the battle map, where I do hope indeed I've not forgotten to talk about anything here, and we shall see what their roster looks like. Welcome then to the battle map. So a brief overview first, and detailing how we are going to deal with this moving forward, and where future videos will not be this long. Along the bottom you can see all of the units broken up into their tiers, so tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and that is how they are laid out in front of you as well, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. You'll note then the bodyguard and any sort of unique units do stand out, and by unique I mean totally untierable, like Siege, for example. They will be at the back, out of the way. Do note that, of course, the game has the barracks event, where certain units are restricted and will only come in after that point. It happens at turn 64, which means you're forced to play with the lower tier units for some time before you can pull in your elite units. I don't pretend to know where every single unit comes in, or either after or before the barracks event. So instead, I line the units up purely by their tier, so that you know if a unit is available to you straight away, but you've seen this video and you know it's a tier 3, for example, you'll know, oh, I'll want to train that. The barracks event, roughly speaking, is between tier 2 and tier 3 for almost every faction, unless they have a trash tier, which means it will be between 3 and 4. So in this instance, the barracks event is sort of down the middle here. But do note, as I say, I just couldn't possibly know when every single unit comes in or for the barracks event, and it doesn't matter enough for me to research the entire roster and list it all out before each video. That would just make me hate these videos, and so I'd never do them. So instead, we just roll the dice and see where we get. But do note, this is how they are in terms of superiority. So if you are able to train, for example, Tirathayar Wardens at turn 1, then do, because they are a fantastic unit. If you can get some of the later tier units earlier on, generally speaking, that means that they will be very rare. You'll only get 1 or 2 of them before the actual barracks event. So let us dive straight in then. So your first 2 units that you will see a lot of are the Gondor Militia and the Coastal Wardens. Gondor Militia are the standard bodyguard units. We do have to pause it or we can't view our own stats, sorry. So Gondor Militia are a unit shared between you and Gondor, and they are your worst unit. But you will note they are actually quite good, with a total defense of 10 and an attack of 6. This is the unit that almost the entire game is trained and spec'd around. The Gondor Militia and the Gondor Infantry. Those 2 units are kind of the baseline for the whole mod. And so that's why it's quite interesting to note that if we think that 10 defense and 6 attack is relatively good, when we come to some of the Orc nations, you'll see how pitifully bad they are. But your earliest tier unit is alright. 10 and 6, as I say. Nothing else particularly substantial. Their morale is average. Response is average. Their movement speed is normal. They get a little bit of a bonus in grassland, and they don't like fighting in the desert or in the snow. Do note that the snow means winter altogether, not just mountains. So they don't like fighting in the winter or in the desert, which doesn't help you because you're near the desert, and winter is once every 4 turns. So every 4th turn, your army is a little worse than it was before. They are a sword and shield unit, so they can attack or they can defend. They fill multiple roles. Primarily, their role is being your cheapest unit. Do note, unfortunately, we can't see the upkeep cost in this section, which is damn disappointing. Because upkeep is far more important than the actual recruitment cost, but the cost does at least give you an idea of roughly how expensive they're going to be, because if the recruitment cost is quite high, generally the upkeep will also be quite high. High is considered between 1,000 and 1,500, cheap is anything under 500, and average is between 500 and 1,000. That is roughly, in my mind, how I always break them up, so this is an average costing unit at 615. The Coastal Wardens are javelin units, not particularly good javelin units with only a 6 missile, but javelins nevertheless. They are your only javelin unit, which makes them very useful against, say it with me now, Mumakil, because Mumakil have a giant hitbox. If you do happen to come up against Mumakil, ballistas, trebuchets, catapults, and Coastal Wardens are your best bet. They will slaughter them, absolutely slaughter them. Even though there's only a 6 missile attack, with 177 javelins hitting, every single one hitting their mark, that is a lot of damage. So they are very good at taking down Mumakil. They require a coastal region, as the name would suggest, so they only come from anywhere that is coast. Coast, of course, is actual coast, but also if a river is able to be sailed by a boat, then the sides of that river will also be coast. So, of course, the Anduin and the Harnan rivers are the 2 nearest to you. You will get coastal units all the way up their length, but they won't come from normal rivers, the one-tile things you see on the map. So they're not that restricted, to be honest. There is a lot of coastal regions. They are your worst unit, though. Sorry, I said the Gondor Militia was, but that's wrong. The Wardens are. Their defense is only 6 and their attack is 3, whereas the Wardens are 6, 10 and 6. So once they've finished with their javelins, the Coastal Wardens are little more than arrow fodder, and you should use them to tie up the enemy's best units, whilst your elite cavalry, which you'll note you get a fair few bits of, cycle charges the back of them. Their morale is poor as well, the response is poor, the speed is the same. The same bonus and malices apply to almost this entire roster. There'll be very few changes. They've only got 2 javelins per man, 55 range, which is very, very low, and their accuracy is not all that good. But they do get an inbuilt bonus against camels, wild horses, and oliphants, as well as being actually good against them because of the hitbox feature. They actually get a statistical boost to their damage when attacking one of those units. They are cavalry killers. They're good anti-cavalry units, but of course they've only got 2 missiles. But note, they are also your cheapest unit. Now, in terms of archers, you do get an early tier archer. They used to be your tier 2, but they were respec'd, and they are the Amrothian archers. They have the same stats as the previous Gondor Militia archers, but it was felt that Dol Amroth had far too many strengths. They had no weaknesses whatsoever, so we've tried to pull back the number of archer units they get to just sort of create some semblance of a weakness, because otherwise, if a faction does everything other than the elves, the elves are the elves, but everyone else, we do try and at least give you some weaknesses, and there's nothing to suggest that Gondor or Dol Amroth have particularly good archers. The days of the Númenórean steel bowmen are far, far, far behind Gondor and Dol Amroth, so there's nothing to say they have excellent archers, so that's reflected. So you've lost the Gondor archer militia, and the Amrothian archers have dropped to their tier. 9 defense, 3 melee, 3 missile. They are pretty good archers, though 3 missile is fairly good. As a sort of rough guide on the melee, missile and defense, the highest total defense for a normal sort of standard unit is either the Eregion Smiths or the Roquen units from Imladris or one of the dwarves, and they have between 30 and 35. That's the absolute highest defense you'll see on an actual unit, not talking about Balrogs or things like that. The highest missile attack you will see is an elf unit that I think has a 14 missile attack. But the more commonly elite missile is between 9 and 12. And likewise, elite attack, the highest, when you know you've got a really good melee attack, is between 10 and 15. So a melee attack of 3 is very, very poor, but a missile attack of 3 is not too bad. Because there aren't very many units in that higher tier. I would say the average missile attack across the whole mod is probably 6. So that's why they're not all that bad. But again, that little spiel will only say now and not again. Their morale is average, response average, same as the other militia. Missiles of 24, so they can fire for a long old time. The highest missiles you'll see is 32. And their range is 160 meters. The best ranges are about 240. 160 therefore means they will get outranged by quite a lot of other archery units. And their accuracy is only average. So not an amazing archer unit, but still better than what you will come up against, say, with Harad and Khand especially. And if you come against Mordor, you'll outclass their archers, no trouble. Gondol Cavalry Militia is your starting cavalry. They are a charge cavalry. Now, granted, and again, a little addendum, all cavalry in this game is designed to charge the enemy. Cycle charge, cycle charge, cycle charge. Nothing cavalry-based should really ever be kept in battle for a long time because they have such a big hitbox that they die really easily. Every unit around them is hitting them and they can only attack one of those units. So they die quite easily. But certain cavalry is given the stats to at least last longer in melee battle, or in melee. And those units I will point out. But generally speaking, the cavalry is defined by either being an excellent charging cavalry, an excellent melee cavalry, or a cavalry unit that's only real purpose is to chase down routing units. Gondor Cavalry Militia do lean on the latter, but they do get a bit of a good charge to go in. You'll note their charge bonus is 5, their attack is 4, defense is 10. So in the early tier, at the start of the game, they will outclass a lot of what you come up against, and they will be a very useful cavalry, but they are quickly themselves surpassed by the squires, as we shall see in a moment. Their secondary attack when they've put their spear away is only 3, so don't keep them in prolonged melee, they will die. They are not a melee unit at all. Charge them in, run them away. Job done. Moving to tier 2 then, when the units start to get the wonderful design from Tarot M, we get the Amrothian Guardsmen and Amrothian Pikemen. The Guardsmen are an anti-cavalry spear and shield, but do remember that spear units now are better against infantry than they were before. No longer are they just absolutely atrocious against infantry, they now actually can defend themselves a bit, but they pay for that by being slightly worse against cavalry. Their attack is only 4, their charge is poor, but their defense is 14, so a very defensive unit. They're again still only average morale and response, but they do get a bonus against mounted units. Just very briefly, morale response means how good are they at dealing with morale shocks, like your general dying, the enemy general dying, being flanked, being outnumbered, the enemy having reinforcements, poison arrows, all those kinds of things. The morale response is how they will deal with that. So average means that if your general dies, this is a candidate for a unit that will break. Their cost is only 700 though, and the militia was 615, so they're not that much more expensive, and they are much better suited to defending than the militia were. But if you're speaking of defending, then look no further than the pikemen. Pikemen in Medieval 2 are overpowered because their animation allows them to keep the enemy at bay and do damage without the enemy attacking them back. When used well, pikemen can absolutely decimate other armies, and even the lowly farmhand pikeman, which is a mercenary unit, which isn't displayed here today, but even the lowly farmhand pikemen can do well in the right circumstances. And of course they are lethal against any type of cavalry. Doesn't matter the disparity between the pike unit and the cavalry unit, even if you've got the game's best cavalry unit, being in my mind the Knights of the Silver Swan, and the game's worst pike unit, being the farmhand pikemen, they will still slaughter the Knights of the Silver Swan if they do a charge poorly. So pikes are very, very good, but that is why they have low attacks, was the point of that spiel, because the OP animation is so good that their attack doesn't need to be good to compensate. So we try to cap the boost gained by the OP animation by giving them low attack. Their charge is 5, which isn't too bad. Their defense is 8. Again, the defense is lowered for pike units because A, they don't have a shield, and B, the enemy can't actually attack them very often, so they need to have a lower defense so that if the enemy does hit them, they can actually be killed. Otherwise, you just have these little islands of impenetrable units on the field, so we have to do some gamey kind of things to bring them down. So the pikes are an excellent unit no matter what tier they're at, but you'll note their stats are similar to guardsmen and whatnot. Then finally, your last actual dedicated foot archer is the Nimrodel Mariners. Used to be Nimrodel Rangers, but they are no longer Rangers. They've lost that. But they can't hide everywhere, but they can hide well in woods. They have a total defense of 16. They have a melee of 7, which means they're very good swordmen when they finish with their archers, which is the point of them. This is why they're Mariners. They're a dual sword and archer unit. They do have a shield when they finished with their bows as well. So they are an upgraded version of the Gondor Militia, who happen to also be your finest archers. You'll note their missile attack is only 5 though, and as I said, the average of the whole game is 6, meaning that even your best unit isn't even above average. So you've got to be a bit careful. You're not going to kill other archer nations all that well. And do note that the Ardanaim, who pride themselves on their Númenórean lineage, will have better archers than you. Because they do still use Númenórean steel bows. If memory serves, or we may have made them weaker, I can't recall. They do require a coastal region as well. That's why I liken them to the wrong unit. They come from the coastal region, so they are slightly restricted. But your first unit with a good morale and a good morale response. They're also slightly faster than everyone else, 5% so they could chase down some routing units better. They have 28 missiles and a range of 180 with a high accuracy. So they are actually good archers, to use a term, but their missile attack just isn't all that good, which is disappointing. But they're the best archer that you're going to get, so use them well. And then, as I mentioned before, the Amroth Squires are your proper cavalry, the first proper cavalry. A charge of 6, defense 14, attack of 6. They have a lance rather than a spear, which makes them better at charging as well. The only real way you know if a unit has a lance or a spear generally is the lance is a lot longer, but that doesn't necessarily mean it actually does. You have to check in battle the way they charge. Lance units have a specific charging animation that's different to a spear unit. And as you play the game more, you'll get to know the difference. Their average morale response. Secondary attack is 5. So once they've finished with their lance or spear, you don't really want to keep them in melee because they're not fantastic melee units, but they are excellent starting cavalry, considerably better than your other cavalry offering at this tier, at this level. And you should try and get them where possible. Note they are about 180 gold coins more costly than the Gondol Cav Militia, so they'll be slightly more in upkeep, but absolutely worth it. And then we come to your proper dedicated units, ones that will start to actually win battles on their own, and also, fortunately, make up the front line of your forces. And they are the Seaward Spearmen and Seaward Footmen, who do much as they would suggest. The Seaward Spearmen are the defensive unit, 6 attack, 22 defense, but quite a poor charge, so a defensive unit, good morale response. Companions, the Seaward Footmen, a 9 attack, considerably better, 3 points better, but the same charge, so again slightly more defensive than aggressive, with a defense of only 19, so better to use the Swordmen to charge and the Spearmen to hold. The Swordmen, sorry, we're on the wrong one. The Footmen, good morale response as well. The Footmen would kill the Spearmen in battle, and that's the point. Spearmen can hold relatively well against most other units, but if you send in the Footmen against a spear unit, it'll break the line there, and that is the point of them. You will note thus far, though, as well, another sort of weakness of Dol Amroth is you have no real shock infantry at the earlier tiers. You have to rely on cavalry to do all of your shock damage. You also will have noticed thus far we have almost no armor piercing units, so anything that is quite heavily armored you will have to just try and kill in charging the enemy. Dol Amroth's entire military strategy is to hammer and anvil over and over and over again. And speaking of hammer and anvil, hammering and anvilaring is not a word. The Seaward Lancers. They are a fantastic cavalry. The defense now is high enough that they're not actually going to worry too much about charging into the enemy. They will survive when they do charge into the enemy. Their attack is 8 and their charge is 10, which is fantastic. They are available everywhere. Their morale is good. Their morale response is good. And their secondary attack is only 7. Is 7, which is only 1 point behind their main attack, meaning that if they stay in melee, they will still do some good damage. They, like the others, don't like deserts or snow, but equally they don't like forests. Cavalry aren't good in forests, so cavalry get a malus in them. And then we come to a unit that is definitely different from version 3 because they now wield bows. They are the Knights of Etheland. Previously the White Knights of Etheland, now just simply Knights of. They inspire nearby troops as well because they're quite a rare unit because they only come from Etheland. So they inspire nearby troops. They get a bonus against other cavalry. So they are a good anti-cavalry killer. And you will note their melee attack is 10 and their defense is 21. They've got quite a poor charge, but the point of this cavalry is to harass the enemy first and then kill and pick off any enemy cavalry. They are an anti-cavalry cavalry. Say cavalry more. Their morale is very good. Their morale response is good. Their speed is up. They're 110 on 100. So they're going to be slightly faster than most other enemies as well, which helps them, as I've said, chase down cavalry. They get 34 missiles with only 130 meter range though. 130 meter range does mean every enemy foot archer in the game, bar possibly 1 or 2, will be able to shoot them before they can shoot back. So it is a risky game harassing the enemy, and you want to try and make sure that they're harassing enemy melee forces, because otherwise they'll just get shot down. Their accuracy though is high, which is good. They do cost an awful lot, but remember they only come from one location, so you'll only have a few of them, but use them to kill the enemy's cavalry, particularly Harad, whose bodyguard is still mounted. Finally, we come to your elite tier, your previously sort of Uber, but you don't really have an Uber, you just have elites. So there are 4 offerings first of all, but remember quite a few units are restricted. And first of those is the Minas Ithil Guardians, noting of course the name, they only come from Minas Ithil, or Minas Morgul as it is until you capture it. You'll have to change the name to Minas Ithil yourself though. But they are the only real shock infantry unit bar the Haven Guard that you actually get, and both of them are in your elite tier, so they're very late in the game. They have a large two-handed sword, as you can see, with a large attack of 16, charge of 8, which is really good for a unit on foot. But note, because they've got no shield, their defense skill is 8. They can be countered to an extent by archers, but 16 armor is fan-blooming-tastic. And you'll struggle to find other armors as high as that outside of dwarves and elves. So they are just an all-round really good unit. Very, very useful indeed. Note that their morale is locked, so they will not run away unless you tell them to. They will fight to the death if you cannot flee. Which can be a negative as well as a positive, because of course if you're caught in a battle and you run away, and then the enemy catches up to you and fights you again, you then cannot manually flee. You need your own units to break in order for them to survive. They will never break, so in those situations they will fight to the death, and if you are going to lose, you will lose them all. But they do have very good morale as well. A unit that has locked morale can still suffer negative effects once its morale would have broken, but they simply can't run away, but they then just fight worse. So if their morale gets to the point where it would break, they will fight on, but they just won't be as good anymore. But their morale is very good to counter that, so it's quite high. But otherwise, they also get a bonus against mounts, which makes them quite an interesting anti-cavalry late game unit too. But note, they are costly, and their upkeep will be quite high. Generally speaking, for upkeep, if you halve the recruitment number, you'll roughly get what the upkeep is likely to be. It's probably more likely to be about 40% rather than 50%, but that gives you a rough idea. Moving on to the Tirith IR Wardens, these are halberdiers. They come from Dol Amroth only. They have a 23 defense, which is fairly good, a 7 attack and a 5 charge, but you'll note at the top there, effective against armor. They are one of only 2 units in your entire roster that is effective against armor, the other being the other Tirith IR unit. Halberdiers don't have an OP animation like pikes do, but they are often always armor piercing, so they're still quite a lethal unit. And remember, they are still excellent against cavalry, because at the end of the day it's a large spear they are wielding, and they get bonuses against cavalry. They are a really, really good unit for the cost, very worthwhile getting, but they do only come from Dol Amroth, as I've already said. Next up, the actual dedicated elite available everywhere and bodyguard of Prince Adriel are the Talon Knights. And I've said available everywhere, they aren't. They're only available in Methrast, Dol Amroth, Linhir, and Gobel Tolfalas, and probably Tarnost as well if you capture that. And I should imagine Itheland as well. So they only come from your homeland. They have unwavering morale, which means it will be damn near impossible for them to break, and indeed they can't actually run away anyway, even if they do. Their defense is 29, which is absolutely fantastic. Their attack is 12, their charge is 4. They featured quite highly on the list of top 10 sword and board units, I think. Memory serves, it was about a year ago now. They frighten enemy infantry and they inspire your own troops. They're a fantastic unit to have on the field, and they are adept at anything you want them to do. They'll defend if you need them to defend, and they'll flank and charge if you need them to flank and charge. Fantastic little units. Supported by the Haven Guard, another restricted unit, unfortunately, but this time more readily available, as it's again a coastal unit. This is the only readily available shock infantry unit you will ever get, because the Minisithil Guardians, you will likely A, never get them, or B, they only come from one place, so we're talking very late game. Haven Guard, however, very good morale, but no, not locked. They will run away. Their defense is only 23, but again, that's about on par with the Guardians. Their attack is 15, their charge is 8. They're an excellent shock infantry. They won't do anything other than shock infantry, though. They're not very good at defending. Don't make them defend. It is a waste of their talents because of that large charge bonus. You want to utilize that where possible. Supporting them at the elitist tier then, of course, we'll start with the Tirith Knights, or Knights of the Tirith. The other armor-piercing unit. You'll note they are mace men. The mace boys rule because they are... Oh dear, that is a choppy image, isn't it? Dear, dear. Their attack is 8, their charge is 6. They are effective against armor, and they are skilled against other mounts. They are another anti-cavalry cavalry, and one with armor piercing, so far better than the Knights of Itheland. 30 total defense means they will not die easily, but again, they only come from one place, Dol Amroth itself. Their morale is very, very good, and their response is impetuous, which does mean that they also have a risk of charging on their own without orders, but I have never, ever, ever seen a unit do that. And if they... And I think even if they actually do, what they don't actually just start running off into the enemy. What they actually do is, if you've got them holding a line and they're in defensive mode, they might charge when the enemy's about 10 meters in front of them, for example. So they won't sit back and take the enemy charge. They will charge into the enemy themselves. That is how I think that actually is used, but I rarely ever see it. Stamina is something that I've not talked about, and I'm unlikely to talk about at all moving forward, so I'm just covering it now so you know, because there's only 3 types of stamina: normal, good, or excellent. Those are the only 3 tiers we can put in the game, so stamina really does not matter. Essentially, elite units will have excellent stamina, middle tier units will have good, and lower tier units will often be normal. It's not worth really talking about. The Tirith Knights as well, very expensive, you'll note there, but as I've already mentioned, they only come from one place. Lastly, the Knights of the Silver Swan, one of the candidates for best cavalry in the game, and a bloody fantastic unit. They have a 10 attack, a 14 charge, a 33 defense. They frighten enemies, they inspire your own, they are fast moving, which is not true because they actually are 5% slower than most cavalry. Unwavering morale, but it is unfortunately locked. Their secondary attack is 9 as well, so fantastic when they've put their lances away. And they, like other cavalry, dislike forest, snow, and deserts. They are very, very expensive. Their upkeep is likely in the 900 to 1,000 bracket, making them damned costly. You will need to plan to get them. But note they only come from, again, those 5 or 6 homeland regions. And then finally your stock general's bodyguard. This is the bodyguard of Imrahil and any other general that joins you after the campaign starts. They are small in number to stop you abusing the fact that they auto replenish. Any sort of cavalry bodyguard nations have always had their cavalries dropped to be about this size. They will still do a ton of damage. They're a fantastic unit, but there's just not very many of them. 32 defense, 10 attack, 14 charge. They're just a lesser version of the Knights of the Silver Swan. And of course, as I say, there are less of them. The recruitment cost, though, is always 1,000 for bodyguards, so you can ignore that. The upkeep for bodyguards, you'll just have to check in campaign. But generally speaking, bodyguards don't tend to have too high upkeep because you've usually got a lot of them. Secondary attack is 10, which is the same as their primary, so they're good in that regard. They get a bonus against other cavalry, which helps them out a lot, although that they don't get a bonus against wargs, only horses and mumakil, or when it says oliphants, it actually means any kind of beast. So also the great beasts of Mordor they'll get a bonus against, and any chariot unit. We should really respec Oliphants to read beasts/chariots, but then no, that's just a lot of work, isn't it? So a very, very good bodyguard unit, but remember there's only a few of them. They'll die if you left in. And finally, I only put it here just to show you that you are one of the nations that get it, the Gondor Trebuchet. So we can unpause and we can speed up the game because that is it. That is the Dol Amroth roster. Now I would absolutely love to play the Guess Who We're Going to Have Next Week episode, but if you can't already guess from the absolutely giant giveaway in the middle of the screen there, it is of course the nations and tribes of Harad, the desert folk from the south. And there they all are, mustering nicely and moving towards my army. Now, I don't intend to show you our armies fighting this time, because the video is already very long. It's just to give you a brief look at what is coming next time. So, that will conclude this Dol Amroth overview. I do hope that you have enjoyed watching this and seeing the changes to version 4. I do hope that I've been entertaining enough to merit this bloody lengthy video. And I hope you'll stick around next week for when we cover Harad. And after that, who knows. But for now, and until we speak again, dear friends, Navar den Pedamad Melonin, and farewell.